The 10,072nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel, Kuwait, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Ms. Joyce Masuya, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. And Ms. Mariam Jalabi, co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1 year ago, the hope of millions of Syrians was realized when President Assad fled the country. As they celebrated earlier this month the events that culminated on 8 December 2024, Syrians again reaffirmed their abiding belief in peace, stability, prosperity, and justice for their country, despite the undeniable and daunting challenges before them. During the Security Council's visit to Syria on 4 December, Council members saw firsthand the opportunities and difficulties the country is facing. The hopes and expectations are high, and the challenges ahead are immense. Syrians have made great strides since a year ago, but serious obstacles remain. The government of Syria has restored state institutions and begun to integrate armed factions under a single command. It has issued a constitutional declaration and formed a new cabinet. Also, indirect legislative elections were held in October. A day of national dialogue also took place. Several key institutions, including the full formation of the People's Assembly and the Constitutional Court, could be established soon. Syrians have also returned home in high numbers. Over 1 million refugees and almost 2 million IDPs have gone back to their areas of origin. Many countries have lifted bilateral sanctions on Syria. Just yesterday, the U.S. Congress repealed the Caesar Act, and last month, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2799, which removed designations on President al-Sharaa and Minister of Interior Khattab. Humanitarian access has improved, but more needs to be done. You will hear more about this from my colleague from OCHA, Assistant Secretary General Joyce Masuya. In another positive development, the Syrian government and the Syrian Democratic Forces reached an agreement on 10 March. As the end-of-year target for implementation of the agreement approaches, we encourage the parties to engage in constructive steps on its security and political aspects. We also urge the parties to engage with the Amman Roadmap of September and implement confidence-building measures to restore trust and bring stability to Ceuta. Mr. President, the levels of violence in Syria have declined notably. However, the situation on the ground is fragile and intercommunal dynamics remain tense. Years of conflict and decades of repressive rule and human rights violations exacerbated tensions along sectarian lines. Tragically, these tensions have boiled over in the past year. The large-scale violence in the coastal region in March, a terrorist attack targeting a church in Damascus in June, and the violence in Druze-majority Ceuta in July. In the north and east, tensions also persist between the Syrian army and the Syrian Democratic Forces. In many cases, Hate speech and disinformation campaigns have fueled communal strife and fear. Hundreds of civilians have been killed in the violence, leading to new displacement. Demands for protection and accountability have intensified as reports of summary executions and abductions targeting specific communities, including Alawites, continue. The United Nations condemns the violence unreservedly. We urge that transparency remains central to the investigations launched by the authorities into these episodes and that perpetrators are held accountable. As Council members saw during the visit, including in meetings with the National Commissions on Missing Persons and Transitional Justice and the investigative committees for the Coast and Sweda, work has begun on dealing with the past and on reconciliation. But more remains to be done. International encouragement and expertise can complement national efforts to sustain peace, justice, and accountability. Mr. President, Israeli airstrikes and incursions in the south have aggravated this security situation. In late November, an incursion and occupying strikes by the Israeli Defense Forces in the town of Beit Jinn killed 13 people, according to Syrian authorities. They also caused displacement, forcing families from Beit Jinn to flee to nearby areas. I reiterate the Secretary General's call on Israel to refrain from violations of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity. I also call on the parties to respect the terms of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. Resuming dialogue between Syria and Israel on security arrangements is imperative. Strong international and regional engagement to support this track is essential. Mr. President, there is continued domestic, regional, and international focus on counterterrorism efforts in Syria, with concerns regarding the presence of foreign terrorist fighters and an ISIL resurgence. In a worrying development, a joint U.S.-Syrian patrol was attacked late last week near Palmyra, killing 2 U.S. soldiers and 1 civilian interpreter, and injuring several others. The Syrian government has condemned the attack, which they stated was carried out by a member of the Syrian security forces suspected of harboring extremist views. The United States has attributed the attack to ISIL and vowed serious retaliation. The prevalence of conventional arms and challenges with stockpile management pose an additional security challenge. Landmines and unexploded ordnance continue to kill and maim Syrians daily. All this points to the need for the political transition to be accompanied by a Syrian program of security sector reform and disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. Mr. President, the Office of the Special Envoy continues to be fully engaged with the government of Syria and Syrian societies. Over this past year, the office supported the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned transition process with advice on constitutional and electoral matters. They've also supported reconciliation and transitional justice efforts in close consultation with national authorities. All of their work is to support an inclusive transition that fosters trust and legitimacy, as this council has called for. To do so with greater impact, the office seeks to be on the ground to engage in a structured and supportive way throughout this transition. Mr. President, the shadows of the past continue to haunt the Syrian people. True healing can only begin through a full reckoning with this history. By addressing the fate of the missing, ensuring accountability for the gravest atrocities, including the use of chemical weapons, and confronting the horrors of war without compromise. Inclusive dialogue among all Syria's components, genuine national reconciliation, sanctions relief, and sustained international support will be essential for the security of Syria and the region. It will be key to restoring investor confidence and laying the foundation for Syria's reconstruction. The full and meaningful participation of Syrian women in shaping that future is essential. I'm pleased to note that Mariam Jalabi will brief today from civil society. Long a stalwart for the participation of women in Syrian political life, she is a co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement. Mr. President, we welcome the continued dialogue with the Security Council at this pivotal moment for Syria. After so much loss of life and suffering, the Syrian people are hopeful for their future and ready to take on the challenges before them. The United Nations is here to support them. Thank you.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Syria continues to navigate immense opportunities and complex challenges, many of which have just been set out clearly by Undersecretary General DiCarlo. But today, the hope that was kindled a year ago continues to radiate. Vigorous and diligent international support remains vital. The success of Syria's transition will depend on many measures. Two of them stand out. The first is a reduction in the level of need in what has been, for more than a decade, one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. The second, linked to this, is a reduction in the size of what has for years been one of our largest humanitarian operations. Today, I want to acknowledge the real progress and opportunities we have seen along this path during the past year, but also the major work still to do. Mr. President, one of the most powerful signs of the hope and confidence that Syrians have for their future has been the steady flow of those returning to their homes after being uprooted by conflict for years. 2 million people displaced within Syria have returned, many after living for years in camps in precarious conditions. Over 1.3 million more have returned from neighboring countries. Many of these families are returning to homes that are damaged or destroyed and to communities with few basic services or job opportunities. They will continue to rely on humanitarian aid in the near term to meet basic needs. Meanwhile, millions more remain displaced across Syria. A majority of those in camps are hesitant to return in the coming year due to lack of adequate housing, basic services like water and electricity, and access to jobs. They too will continue to rely on humanitarian aid, especially during these cold winter months. Mr. President, the current moment has given Syria the opportunity to finally bring down these needs. But for this to happen at pace and at scale, we need three key things from this Council and the wider international community. First, we need attentive diplomacy to de-escalate and resolve ongoing flashpoints and to prevent new fighting. Levels of violence have reduced dramatically in Syria, but sporadic hostilities continue. Over 155,000 people remain displaced from their homes following fighting in Asweda in July. At the end of November, 13 people were killed and 2,000 were impacted due to clashes and airstrikes during an Israeli military operation in Beit Jinn in rural Damascus. Last week's attack in Palmyra and other suspected ISIL attacks in recent months also illustrate the fragile situation in many areas. Beyond the immediate human impact, such as violence robs Syria of the stability that will enable desperately needed investments in development. Second, we need support for such investments. Syria has made remarkable strides reintegrating with the international community. This includes the easing of unilateral sanctions by a range of countries. Humanitarians have long been able to operate at scale in Syria thanks to Resolution 2664 and similar exemptions under most unilateral sanctions regimes. The easing of sanctions should further facilitate procurement and transactions of our operations. More importantly, such steps are opening the door to Syria's economic reintegration with the region and the world, and to critical investment in its recovery and reconstruction. But such resources will take time and sustained political will to mobilize, and their impact will take even longer to unfold. Mobilizing tangible and targeted development finance, including to ensure the most vulnerable are not left behind, and rebuilding confidence in Syria's legal, financial, and security environment will also be critical to bringing down humanitarian needs. The transition from humanitarian aid to longer-term recovery and reconstruction will require support from a wide range of partners in support of government-led efforts. For the UN's part, a new Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework is being developed to channel UN development and recovery efforts in the coming years, aligning support with Syrian national priorities. In the meantime, where we can, the UN and partners will continue to prioritize humanitarian activities that also advance recovery. Mr. President, given the scale of the needs and the time required for development efforts to take hold, we also need support to sustain and expand the flow of humanitarian assistance in the near term. During the past year, we have been able to shift to more efficient ways of working. We have moved from a uniquely complex operation to a more streamlined response. All subnational hubs now report to Damascus, and our new humanitarian coordinator arrived last week. While we continue to bring in critical assistance from Turkey, this month we will complete the shift from the previous cross-border operation to more standard use of commercial mechanisms, reflecting the normalization of procurement and supply routes in Syria. Let me extend my appreciation here to Turkey for their facilitation of the cross-border operations, more than 65,000 UN trucks since 2014, which provided a lifeline to millions of people in need. Today, we are able to reach more people in more places more easily, and we have strengthened regular and practical engagements with the government in Damascus and at the local level on a range of areas, including making humanitarian procedures for the UN and NGOs more efficient, organizing more rigorous needs assessments, developing a national contingency plan, and technical support across a range of sectors. Because of these improvements and using this moment of change in Syria to focus our efforts in line with the humanitarian reset, we have been able to reach 3.4 million people per month, 25% more than last year, despite lower levels of funding. This includes mobilizing to respond to new needs as well as existing ones. But with our humanitarian appeal for 2025 only 30% funded, there are millions more people that we cannot help. This shortfall continues to cause reductions or disruptions in critical assistance and difficult prioritization decisions. Donors continue to provide generous support, and here allow me acknowledge the EU, the UK, and the US as the largest donors to our humanitarian appeal this year. Last week, the Emergency Relief Coordinator also allocated $18 million for Syria through the Central Emergency Response Fund. Our teams are completing a first countrywide multi-sector needs assessment as well as updated food security and nutrition assessments, which will underpin an even more targeted and prioritized response plan for 2026, which we will issue in the first quarter of the year. But we know needs will remain immense next year, and without a reversal in the downward funding trend, more and more people will fall behind, and the task for recovery will only grow. Mr. President, my colleagues in Syria recently spoke with Rawa, a single mother who returned from Turkey with her 2 children to her village in Hama. She dreams of starting a small business with which, she said, she could finally offer her children the future they deserve. Her story echoes those of countless more women across Syria who want to rebuild their lives and help their country recover. We owe it to them to give them that chance. It is rare that a crisis of Syria's magnitude is presented with such a potential turnaround. The past year has provided cause for encouragement for us to redouble our efforts. We must seize the moment. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Msuya for her briefing. I now give the floor to Mariam Jalabi.
السيد الرئيس، أصحاب السعادة، أشكركم على إتاحة الفرصة لي لتقديم هذه الإحاطة. واسمحوا لي بداية أن أوجه رسالة قصيرة باللغة العربية. أتوجه برسالتي إلى السوريات والسوريين في كل مكان، في الداخل، في الشتات، إلى من عادوا ليواجهوا خساراتهم وجراحهم. إلى شهداء الثورة السورية الذين قالوا لا في وجه الظلم ودفعوا الأثمان الباهظة ولم يشهدوا يوم الفرح الكبير بسقوط الأسد. إلى من لا يزالون في المخيمات، إلى من لا يزالون على قيد الأمل في تحقيق العدالة. كل عام وأنتم بخير. لنواصل طريقنا سوياً بوعي ومسؤولية وبإصرار أن يكون صوت الشعب السوري العظيم هو مصدر كل السلطات وبوصلتها. Excellencies, my name is Mariam Jalabi. I am a daughter of the Syrian Revolution from Qamishlo and the Golan Heights. I represent the Syrian women's political movement. Like many Syrians, my struggle is deeply personal. My father, Khalis Jalabi, was imprisoned multiple times in Assad's prisons, as were relatives, friends, and countless Syrians whose lives were marked by fear and persecution under the regime. December 8, 2024 marked Syria's liberation, a historic turning point, a new dawn that opened the door to building a country that all Syrians can claim as their own, rooted in equality, justice, and dignity. On January 5th, 2025, I returned to Syria after 14 years in exile. At the border, I was told I had been wanted by 3 security branches. Yet, the officer smiled and said, "Welcome home." I entered my country without fear. Later, I brought my family for the first time to show them that we now have a country we can finally call home. What I share today is not an abstract political appeal. It is the voice of women and families who lived for 54 years under a brutal regime and paid the ultimate price for freedom over the past 14 years. Excellencies, the road ahead is turbulent and demanding. but allow me to outline a path forward built on 3 independent pillars. First pillar, a political transition anchored in democratic principles and the rule of law. This means, as stipulated by Resolution 1325, recognizing women as full partners in New Syria and architects of its constitutional, economic, and political future. My message to you today is clear. We stand here ready for the work it requires. Yet, today, women hold only 5% of seats in the People's Assembly and only 1 ministerial position, marking women's representation far from where it needs to be. Genuine political engagement with a guarantee of at least 30% women's inclusion, moving towards parity, is critical for national commissions, constitutional processes, elections, local governance, security sector reform, and economic planning. Further, it is essential to open civic and political space so people can freely express themselves and form political parties reflecting their vision for a pluralistic Syria. The role of civil society, having carried the struggle for the past 14 years, must also be affirmed as an essential partner. All of this must be anchored in the spirit of Resolution 2254, reaffirmed by Resolution 2799 as a roadmap for an inclusive Syrian-led transition. Second pillar, protecting the human rights of every Syrian without exception. The true measure of any transition lies in the safety and dignity of all civilians, regardless of identity or geography. Lives continue to be lost in Syria to massacres and sexual and gender-based violence, putting entire communities in grave danger. On December 8, Syrians collectively vowed, never again. Now, we must turn that vow into reality. This means an end to abductions, torture, and organized violence, especially all forms of gender-based violence, by all parties. Justice and accountability must be core principles of the political transition, with women's rights at the center, including through the National Commission for Transitional Justice. Clarifying the fate of all disappeared and missing persons, and ensuring support for their families, including through the National Commission for the Missing. No family can heal while loved ones are unaccounted for. A comprehensive national plan, law, to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. We need a commitment to reform and refrain from adopting any new discriminatory laws on personal status, nationality, labor, and education in line with international standards. This includes the directive issued recently barring mothers from having custody over their children. The withdrawal of Assad regime's reservations to CEDAW is a must. It undermines its core guarantees of equality and non-discrimination, including freedom of movement and equality rights in marriage. Protection also means protection from external aggression and violations of sovereignty. When I returned to Syria in January, I found Israeli forces occupying my village in the Golan Heights. Last week, the doors were blown off my family home. I know firsthand how occupation strips communities of dignity and belonging. Syrians in the Golan, like all Syrians, deserve to live free of violence, occupation, and fear. No transition can gain trust without safety, and no peace can hold without justice, and no future can be built without inclusivity of all Syrians, including women, civil society, youth, and other marginalized groups. Third pillar, sustainable economic recovery. Excellencies, the continued lifting of broad sanctions is essential for economic recovery, without which we cannot rebuild. Over 90% of Syrians live under the poverty line. Over 50% of education and healthcare infrastructure and 1/3 of housing have been damaged or destroyed. More than 2.5 million children are out of school. These are not just statistics. These are warnings that without ensuring economic dignity, we are condemning a generation to uncertainty. Women and girls are deeply affected by these economic crises. When men were killed, disappeared, detained, or displaced, gender roles began to shift. In addition to the continuing of the unpaid and invisible gender labor of caring for their families and the injured, millions of women became sole providers. They did this during conflict without access to formal work, banking, land ownership, documentation, or support. They continue doing this while facing gender-based violence and legal discrimination. Economic recovery must include women at its core because they are rooted in the needs of their own communities. Also, the National Reconstruction Plan must include rural and heavily damaged areas, not only major cities. In light of all of these challenges, at such a sensitive moment in Syria's transition, I urge the Security Council to, first, initiate discussions on how best to support an inclusive, rights-based, Syrian-owned and Syrian-led transition, including through a new UN presence. Second, demand the full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation of all women at all levels of Syria's transition, and respect for their human rights, in accordance with the Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security. Third, call on the Syrian authorities to work with women's civil society to develop, adopt, and fully implement a Syrian National Action Plan on women, peace, and security. Fourth, demand an end to the continued Israeli aggression in Syria and the full withdrawal to the 1974 line in accordance with the disengagement agreement. Failure to do so endangers civilians and undermines regional security. Finally, the Syrian people want justice. Hold Assad and his collaborators accountable, including by referring the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court. Excellencies, Syria does not need guardianship. It needs partnership, shared responsibility between Syrians and the international community. Peace will not be built by political arrangements alone, but through justice and unwavering respect for the dignity of every Syrian. اسمحوا لي أن أنهي كما بدأت باللغة العربية. عاشت سوريا حرة مستقلة وعاش الشعب السوري العظيم. شكراً. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Jalabi for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and a special thank you to all of our briefers today. First, I want to condemn the cowardly terrorist ambush on U.S. personnel in Syria on December 13th. The United States mourns the loss of Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, and U.S. civilian interpreter Ayad Mansour Sukat. We also hope for a speedy recovery for those who were wounded. We remain committed to defeating terrorism with our Syrian partners. Alongside the Syrian government, we will relentlessly pursue every individual, facilitator, financier, and enabler involved in this heinous act. We welcome President al-Shara's strong commitment to identify, pursue, and hold accountable the perpetrators of this attack. Together, we will eradicate terrorism in Syria. Colleagues, last week, Syrians marked the one-year anniversary of the fall of the Assad regime and welcomed their new chance for peace, unity, and prosperity. We honor their resilience, and we join them in celebrating the shared hope for a future that belongs to the Syrian people. As President Trump stated earlier this month, the United States is working to make sure that the government of Syria continues to do what it can to build a unified country. Our vision for a prosperous Middle East and a stable Syria is at peace with itself and with its neighbors. A Syria at peace with itself is one in which the future of the country belongs to every Syrian. The United States reaffirms our support for a peaceful, prosperous Syria that includes its minorities. Peace among neighbors, including between Israel and Syria, is a critical component of this vision, and we want to do everything we can to help achieve that. We have ceased most U.S. sanctions on Syria to encourage business and commercial development in the area and allow Syria the chance to rebuild. We continue to support and facilitate dialogue between the Syrian government and the Syrian Democratic Forces. We are focused on maintaining this positive momentum on the implementation of and recommitment to the March 10th integration agreement between the SDF and the Syrian government. The United States also continues to support vulnerable populations in Syria, particularly the minorities in the country's south. Colleagues, as Syria enters the second year of its transition, let us continue to work to support the Syrian government's efforts to build a stable and prosperous country. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Признательность заместителю генерального секретаря ООН по политическим вопросам и вопросам миростроительства Розмари Ди Карло и помощнику генерального секретаря ООН по гуманитарным вопросам Джойс Мсуи за обстоятельные доклады по ситуации в Сирийской Арабской Республике. Внимательно выслушали госпожу Джалаби. 4 декабря состоялась первая в истории миссия Совета в Дамаск. В свою очередь, хотели бы также выразить признательность сирийским властям за оказанное гостеприимство и поделиться впечатлениями по итогам этой краткой, но весьма важной поездки. Ключевыми моментами, безусловно, стали выражение консолидированной позиции делегации Совета Безопасности в пользу уважения суверенитета, независимости и территориальной целостности Сирии, а также направленный нами единый сигнал о безальтернативности продвижения подлинно инклюзивного процесса политического перехода в стране, ведомого и осуществляемого самими сирийцами, стабилизации ситуации в Сирии и дальнейшего устойчивого и поступательного развития этой страны. В данной связи востребованными оказались контакты не только с руководством Сирии, но и встречи с представителями различных слоев населения, в том числе этноконфессиональных меньшинств. Немаловажно, что в ходе этих бесед подчеркивалось принципиальное значение сохранения единого сирийского государства, для чего, безусловно, требуется налаживание искреннего общенационального диалога с участием широкого спектра этнических и конфессиональных групп, включая алавитов, друзов, суннитов и курдов. Господин председатель, миссии Совета Безопасности удалось воочию убедиться в том, что сейчас власти Сирийской Арабской Республики находятся на непростом этапе политического перехода и сталкиваются с рядом масштабных социально-экономических вызовов в различных частях страны. Решение этих проблем по-прежнему во многом осложняется агрессивным внешним вмешательством отдельных соседей Сирии. Отмечаем непростую обстановку в Заефрате, где некоторые внешние и внутренние игроки не оставляют попыток разыграть курдскую карту. Однако наиболее вопиющими нарушениями суверенитета Сирии, вне сомнения, являются идущие вразрез с международным правом действия Израиля на юге Арабской Республики. Нас крайне тревожит военная активность Западного Иерусалима, который не прекращает наносить удары по территории Сирийской Арабской Республики под предлогами защиты сирийских меньшинств и борьбы с террористическими угрозами. В данном контексте не можем не упомянуть о последствиях кровопролитной вылазки Цахал 28 ноября в населенном пункте Бeit Джинне Дамасской области, где, по поступающей информации, в результате наземного рейда израильтян и последующих авианалетов погибли свыше 20 сирийцев. Помимо силовых акций и непосредственно оккупации сирийских голландских высот, в израильском правительстве выдвигают одиозные требования о демилитаризации сирийского юга от Дамаска до Голан. Не менее провокационным стал и визит высокопоставленной делегации Израиля во главе с премьер-министром Нетаньяху на оккупированные Голаны в середине ноября. Призываем израильское руководство отказаться от подобных опасных шагов, напрямую затрагивающих суверенитет и территориальную целостность Арабской Республики. Рассчитываем и на то, что в Западном Иерусалиме не на словах, а на деле подтвердят свою приверженность соглашению о разъединении сил на оккупированных голландских высотах от 1974 года, выведут армейские подразделения с произвольно занятых ими позиций и будут способствовать восстановлению полноценной и беспрепятственной деятельности сил ООН по наблюдению за разъединением, мандат которых Совет Безопасности планирует в ближайшие дни продлить. Господин председатель, еще одним серьезным вызовом на земле в Сирии остаются террористические угрозы, прежде всего со стороны ИГИЛ и Аль-Каиды. Наглядным подтверждением сохранения данной проблемы стало осуществленное 13 декабря нападение террористов на американо-сирийский патруль в центральной части Сирийской Арабской Республики, вблизи Пальмиры, в результате которого погибли 3 американцев и несколько человек получили ранения. Выражаем соболезнования родным и близким погибших, желаем скорейшего выздоровления всем пострадавшим. Отмечаем и проведенную по поступающей информации работу властей САР по поиску и задержанию исполнителей этой атаки. Все детали произошедшего еще предстоит прояснить. Однако данная атака лишний раз напоминает о необходимости решительной борьбы с террористическими проявлениями в Сирии, включая активность иностранных террористов-боевиков, не допуская реинкарнации этой угрозы и ее дальнейшего распространения. Господин председатель, помимо внешних и внутриполитических рисков, перед новым руководством Сирии остро стоят экономические и гуманитарные проблемы. Мы обеспокоены тем, что, несмотря на политические изменения в стране и усилия организации системы ООН, гуманитарная ситуация не только остается тяжелой, но и демонстрирует признаки системной деградации. Усиливающийся экономический кризис приобрел затяжной характер, а снижение реальных доходов населения и отсутствие продовольственной безопасности превратились в устойчивый фактор нестабильности. Добавим к этому регулярные вооруженные инциденты и сохраняющуюся напряженность в ряде провинций, которые оказывают разрушительное воздействие и ограничивают доступ сирийцев к базовым товарам и услугам. Кризис в Сирии наглядно демонстрирует, как односторонние санкции, торговые рестрикции и иные принудительные меры подрывают экономическую устойчивость и ложатся тяжелым долгосрочным бременем, прежде всего на самые уязвимые слои населения. Сегодня стране, как никогда, необходима не только гуманитарная помощь, но и инвестиции, проекты раннего восстановления и программы технического содействия. Не может не разочаровывать то, что наполнение гумпризыва составляет лишь 30% или 945 миллионов из заявленной цели в 3,2 миллиарда долларов. Что касается проектов и программ восстановления, то их реализация невозможна без полной отмены и легитимных односторонних санкций, которые, к сожалению, вопреки заявлениям западных государств, продолжают действовать и усиливать кризис. Мы исходим из того, что новой Сирии необходим решающий импульс для собственного развития, запуск полноценной экономической активности, восстановление производственного потенциала и формирования способности самостоятельно обеспечивать потребности населения. Важно объединить усилия международного сообщества с тем, чтобы помочь сирийцам в реализации этой задачи. Благодарю за внимание.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Undersecretary Di Carlo and Assistant Secretary Msuya for their briefings. I particularly want to thank Ms. Mariam Jalabi for her statement and for being a strong and trusted voice of the Syrian opposition for the last 14 years here in New York. Mr. President, with its historic visit to Syria, a new chapter has started in relationship between this Council, the United Nations, and the Syrian people, a relationship we must continue to reinforce and rebuild. During the Council's visit, we can recognize many positive achievements realized by the transitional government in the past year, but also the need for further progress. Our meeting with civil society representatives confirmed the need to continue to call for an inclusive and transparent political process, and meeting with relatives of victims from the violence on the coast and in Ceuta, the importance of accountability and progress on transitional justice at a time when intercommunal tensions and sectarian violence remain high was made abundantly clear. We urge the transitional government to make the best use of the UN's expertise and capacities to this end. A natural next step would be the establishment of a permanent presence of the Office of the Special Envoy in Damascus. Mr. President, during the Council visit to Damascus, we were impressed by the level of security, but also reminded of the many security challenges that continue to plague the country. We were deeply appalled by the news of the attack on a joint US-Syrian patrol in Palmyra last week, demonstrating the persistent threat posed by ISIL across Syria. We express our deepest condolences to the families of the victims, and we underline our unwavering commitment to ensuring that ISIL must not be allowed to recreate their terrorist regime. We continue to reiterate our commitments to Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Denmark urges Israel to halt its airstrikes and incursions inside Syria and to respect the 1974 disengagement of forces agreement. We hope that the ongoing negotiations between Israel and Syria translate into tangible peace and stability for the people of Syria and for the region. With respect to the Northeast, we encourage the transitional government and the SDF to stay at the negotiating table also after the deadline set for implementation on March 10 agreement by the end of this year. Mr. President, as highlighted by Ms. Jalabi, women should play a critical role in Syria's transition. Last week, Denmark, Finland, and Norway co-hosted an event in Damascus focusing on women, peace, and security, together with Minister of Social Affairs Hind Kabawat and UN Women. As was the case with the Council's meetings with civil society, an event like this would have been unthinkable just 1 year ago. Women's full and meaningful participation in all aspects of governance and public life is required for a peaceful, inclusive, and sustainable future for Syria. Importantly, women should be broadly represented in the People's Assembly, but also in the executive branch and in the private sector. With the number of challenges Syria faces in the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the country, all smart minds are needed to succeed. Colleagues, while long-term progress calls for patience, the humanitarian situation requires acute action, as we just heard from Assistant Secretary General Msuya. With winter approaching, shelter, heating, housing, and nutrition are crucial. Preparing local communities for returnees, including opening schools and building social cohesion, is also needed. The humanitarian situation requires urgent and comprehensive UN response, and Denmark remains deeply concerned about the severe underfunding of the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan. Denmark has chosen to make an extraordinary year-end contribution to the humanitarian response to the Syrian crisis of $6 million, in addition to the almost $50 million already allocated this year. We encourage all other member states to join us in increasing their funding. Mr. President, in closing, the gunfire that lit up the Damascus sky little over a year ago has given way to fireworks celebrating the one-year anniversary of the fall of the Assad regime. These celebrations are a sign that the resolve of the Syrian people endures. When visiting Damascus, we saw the joy and pride on the faces of people in the streets, but we also saw the shattered buildings in the outskirts of the city, reminding us of the brutality of what came before. Looking back, the progress made by Syria over the past year has been nothing short of remarkable. At the same time, the challenges facing Syria are many, and the path forward will be tough. We ask the Syrians to trust us when we say that we are here to support you and that the UN can help accompany the new Syria, Syria al-Shadida, on this path forward. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo, SG Joyce Musuya for their briefings, as well as Ms. Mariam Jalabi for her pertinent statement and her clear messages. Mr. President, the recent historic visit of this Council to Syria for the first time since its founding in 1945 sent a strong signal of support for Syria's reintegration into the international community. It also demonstrated UN's commitment in this regard. As Syria has embarked on the initial phases of post-Civil War reconstruction, the first anniversary since Assad's fall should be translated into concrete steps toward its full recovery and re-establishment on the international stage. The UN can act as a reliable partner to the Syrian authorities and play a crucial role in making such vision a reality. In this respect, we look forward to the imminent appointment of a new special envoy, and we support the relocation of his or her office from Geneva to Damascus. Mr. President, turning the page in the Syrian Arab Republic requires the full protection and inclusion of all its society components. A nationwide reconciliation presupposes that all voices will be heard. All will be fairly represented and all will be equally protected. Muslims, Alawites, Christians, Druze, and Kurds deserve the same right of equal representation and the same chance to peace. In this vein, we look forward for the remaining parliamentary seats to compensate for the underrepresented communities, including women, ethnic and religious representatives. Similarly, it is beyond doubt that extremism cannot stain the path to peace and security and should be addressed accordingly. It is crucial to ensure accountability for those who committed criminal acts. We condemn the recent attack on the U.S. military convoy in Syria, resulting in the death of 2 soldiers and 1 civilian. Syria's accession to the anti-ISIS coalition, a most welcome step, must be translated into targeted measures to uproot radicalism. Syrians cannot afford another descent into violence, stemming from inside the country or abroad. In this respect, we express concern about the recent incidents in Homs. We also regret the tragic loss of 13 civilians, including women and children, on November 28 in the town of Beit Jinn as a violation of international humanitarian law. We express our sincere condolences to the families of the victims. On a positive note, we are encouraged by certain steps, such as the conduct of the first trial on suspects linked to the deadly coastal violence, the detention of security and military personnel for perpetrating sectarian attacks in Showdown, as well as the overtures made by President al-Sharaa to the Christian community, hoping that they will translate in concrete results. We look forward to the publication of the Syrian Commission's report by the end of this year. Accountability and transitional justice should remain a top priority. In parallel, security sector reform is a prerequisite for stability. The March 10 agreement between the SDF and Damascus must be implemented in good faith without foreign interference. And the situation in the northeast must not be used as a pretext for foreign actors to intervene in Syria's domestic affairs. Last but not least, the path to recovery requires expedited international support. Such support is urgently needed as the humanitarian situation across Syria is exacerbated by harsh winter conditions, high levels of malnutrition, and significant funding constraints. Greece has financially contributed and will continue to do so to various humanitarian fields. Moreover, we have repeatedly expressed our readiness to stand by the Syrians and actively participate in the recovery of the country. In concluding, Mr. President, inclusivity, accountability, and respect of Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity constitute key elements to putting the country back on the track of stability and prosperity. The Council's visit to Syria served as a testament to the progress achieved, as well as an expression of trust in the new Syrian government and all Syrians. We look forward to further strengthening our relations with Damascus, and we remain committed to the vision of a prosperous Syria worthy of the aspirations of the Syrian people, where the rule of law and human rights are respected and where all feel safe and equal. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, ASG Joyce Masuya, and Ms. Mariam Jalabi for their briefings. 1 year ago, Syria reached a historic milestone after years of devastating conflict. That moment marked not only a turning point for the Syrian people, but provided an opportunity for a path towards stability, recovery, and reconciliation. It also opened a renewed window for the international community to engage constructively in support of the Syrian people. The recent Security Council's visit conveyed an important political message of solidarity and allowed Council members to witness firsthand the realities on the ground, reinforcing the importance of sustained and informed engagement. Over the past year, Syria has witnessed sustained movement, both across internal and international tracks. In this context, the transition process emerged as the foremost priority. We note with appreciation the transitional steps undertaken by the Syrian government over the past year, including the issuance of a constitutional declaration, the formation of a new cabinet, the conduct of legislative elections, and the convening of a national dialogue day. The establishment of parliament and a constitutional court would represent further important steps towards rebuilding a functioning and inclusive state architecture. Mr. President, the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Syria remain indispensable for lasting stability. All state institutions and security structures must ultimately operate under a single central framework to prevent fragmentation and ensure effective governance. The progress and efforts by Syrian government towards reintegrating armed factions under a unified command should be supported. In this context, we encourage the full and timely implementation of the 10th March Agreement as well as the Amman Roadmap as constructive steps towards national cohesion and inclusive security arrangements. At the same time, terrorism continues to pose a serious challenge. We condemn the recent terrorist attack on a joint US-Syrian patrol in Palmyra and express our deep condolences on the precious lives lost. It is a stark reminder that Daesh ISIS remains a threat and must be decisively confronted. Similarly, addressing the presence of foreign terrorist fighters and advancing disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration measures are critical to consolidating long-term security. On the economic front, the lifting of sanctions by the United States and the European Union, alongside growing investment by regional countries including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, are welcome steps. Attention should now shift decisively from a humanitarian framework towards sustainable development and reconstruction. This transition is essential to restoring livelihoods, rebuilding critical infrastructure, and enabling the people of Syria to regain a sense of normalcy after years of hardship. In this regard, international support must be mobilized in a coordinated, predictable, and principled manner. Mr. President, at a time when de-escalation and peace are urgently needed, and despite Syria's continued efforts to exercise restraint and pursue diplomatic avenues, repeated and blatant violations of Syria's sovereignty by Israel undermine stability and risk further escalation. We condemn the attacks in Beit Jinn and occupation of the Syrian territory by Israel. These actions are not only against international law, but also run counter to peace efforts and must be stopped. This was also the sense from the Security Council mission to Damascus. The Security Council resolutions 338 and 497 and the 1974 disengagement agreement should be strictly adhered to, and any new security arrangements must have the consent of the concerned parties and the endorsement of the Security Council. Pakistan reaffirms our full commitment to stand with Syria and its people, to support a Syrian-owned and Syrian-led political process, to uphold Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to work with the international community to ensure that the Syrian people are empowered to rebuild their country in peace, dignity, and stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Agradezco a la subsecretaria general de Asuntos Políticos y de Consolidación de la Paz, Rosemary DiCarlo, a la secretaria general adjunta de Asuntos Humanitarios y coordinadora adjunta del Socorro de Emergencia, Joyce Msuya, y a la cofundadora del Movimiento Político de Mujeres Sirias, Mariam Jalabi, por sus presentaciones. A su vez, extiendo una cordial bienvenida a los representantes de la República Árabe Siria, Kuwait, la República Islámica del Irán, Israel y Turquía en la sala. Presidente, hace apenas un año Siria atravesaba uno de los capítulos más sombríos de su milenaria historia. En la búsqueda de su libertad, su pueblo resistía con valentía mientras permanecía atrapado en un conflicto alimentado por múltiples actores. Hoy, ese mismo país, aún marcado por heridas profundas, ha comenzado a escribir nuevas páginas con un tono de esperanza. La primera visita oficial del Consejo de Seguridad a Damasco ha puesto de manifiesto un hecho fundamental. Siria ha reabierto sus puertas al mundo. Panamá agradece las atenciones brindadas a nuestro representante permanente, quien nos comunicó sus impresiones sobre la genuina felicidad que presenció al interactuar con varios actores en Siria. El contacto directo con las autoridades interinas, la sociedad civil, las comunidades afectadas por la violencia sectaria y los órganos de transición demuestran que existe un deseo compartido de avanzar. Esta coyuntura ofrece una oportunidad para que el surgimiento de espacios públicos que demuestren que un nuevo contrato social es posible, un contrato entre los sirios y su gobierno que evite la marginación de las minorías, abra espacio a las contribuciones de las mujeres y atienda sus aspiraciones de dignidad y justicia para las víctimas. Apreciamos la presentación de Mariam Jalabi, la cual nos conmovió y además nos hizo reflexionar sobre la dura situación que atraviesan las mujeres en el terreno. Nos complace que con esta transición política haya más esperanza hacia un futuro más prometedor en este tema. De igual manera, la creciente reintegración diplomática de Siria y la flexibilización de sanciones evidencian una renovada voluntad política de la comunidad internacional. También observamos cómo los desafíos persisten, tensiones sociales, heridas sin sanar entre comunidades, dificultades económicas y estructuras administrativas incipientes. Recientemente fuimos testigos del ataque perpetrado en Palmyra, que resultó en la trágica muerte de 2 soldados del ejército de los Estados Unidos y un intérprete civil, por quienes extendemos condolencias a sus familiares. Este hecho subraya la necesidad de reforzar la lucha contra el terrorismo y responder con la debida contención para reafirmar que Siria ya no es una zona de guerra, sino un país que avanza hacia el Estado de Derecho. Por lo anterior, instamos a las autoridades interinas sirias a preservar este espíritu de colaboración, apertura y respeto a los derechos humanos, avanzando hacia una Siria estable, orientada a mejorar la vida de todos los sirios y con ello contribuir a la estabilidad de la región. Presidente, Panamá observa la realidad actual de Siria con comprensión y solidaridad, conscientes de lo que implica recomponerse desde la adversidad y reconstruir un país desde sus cimientos. Por ello, reconocemos este momento con esperanza y con sentido de oportunidad, porque Siria puede recorrer el camino del desarrollo y las Naciones Unidas puedan acompañarla con el respeto a su soberanía, pero también con firmeza en defensa de los principios consagrados en la Carta y la Resolución 2254. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+, namely Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Algeria. At the outset, the A3+ thanks USG Rosemary DiCarlo and ASG Joyce Msuya for their briefings. We especially commend Deputy Special Envoy Najat Roshdi for her dedication and wish her, on behalf of the A3+, a speedy recovery. We wish her successor, Mr. Claudio Cordon, every success. We renew our full support to the United Nations efforts in supporting Syria during the transitional period. We also listened attentively to the representative of the civil society. Mr. President, 1 year ago, Syria entered a new chapter on its history, one marked by hope for freedom and prosperity, but also by serious challenges. The Security Council's visit to Damascus on 4th December conveyed a strong message of solidarity with Syria and its people and allowed the Council to better grasp both the scale of the challenges and the determination to overcome them. In this regard, I would like to highlight the following point. First, the A3+ welcomed the Day of Dialogue in Syria and remains encouraged by the discussions the Council held with civil society in Syria. We underscore the central role of women and youth in conflict prevention, in peace building, in recovery, reconciliation, and in the reconstruction of a cohesive and inclusive Syrian society. Therefore, we call for the integration of women and youth in all effort related to the management of the transitional period. This meaningful participation is not optional, but indispensable to building legitimate and resilient institutions. Second, violence. Violence can only overcome through reconciliation and transitional justice. Syria's rich heritage of peaceful coexistence among communities must be preserved and strengthened. we encourage the Syrian government to pursue further concrete steps in this regard. Third, a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process is not a slogan, but the core principle of Resolution 2254. Inclusivity must guide all political, social, and institutional efforts to ensure lasting stability and prosperity. Fourth, the A3+ reaffirmed its unwavering support for the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria. We firmly reject any interference in Syria's internal affairs. Decisions related to the future of Syria must be taken by Syrians and their legitimate representatives. Fifth, the recent terrorist attack is a stark reminder of the persistent threat posed by terrorism. The resurgence of Daesh is a grave concern for the region and for international peace and security. The A3+ calls for effective and decisive collective action. Six, Israel continue to be a source of destabilization in Syria. The A3+ condemns Israel's ongoing military operations on Syrian territory. Operations which constitute clear violations of international law. In this regard, we condemn the recent incursions, including drone strikes by Israel in the village of Beit Jinn, in which 13 people lost their lives. We call for the full implementation of the 1974 disengagement agreement and reaffirm that the occupied Syrian Golan is an integral part of Syria in accordance with Security Council Resolution 497. This Israeli violation must cease immediately. 7, President. The scale of destruction in Syria is unprecedented, and the needs are immense. The international community must adopt a comprehensive approach, moving from humanitarian assistance to sustainable development. Refugee return and national stability are inseparable from reconstruction and economic recovery. Yet current funding levels and investment remains far below what is required. The A3+ calls upon donors to honor their commitments and for the private sector to increase its investment in Syria. In conclusion, President, the A3+ reaffirms its full and enduring commitment to stand with Syria and its people, to support a Syrian-owned political process, to uphold its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to mobilize international solidarity so that the Syrian people can rebuild their country in peace, in dignity, and stability. This Council must remain united and engaged to ensure that this historic opportunity translates into lasting peace for Syria and for the wider region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG DiCarlo and ASG UNSCIA for their informative briefings. My appreciation also goes to Ms. Jalabi for her insightful remarks. The Council's recent visit marked a new chapter for Syria after the fall of Assad regime. Yet, the heinous terrorist attack against the US-Syria joint patrol tragically illustrate the fragile peace and security in this country. Let me highlight the following 3 points. First, we urge Damascus to swiftly devise a roadmap that can prevent the further rise of violent extremism in the country as a means to achieve an inclusive transition for all Syrians. While the motive is to be revealed, it is deeply concerning that the accused has been serving in the internal security forces, the very institution tasked to provide security for all components of the Syrian society. Needless to say, all segments of this diverse and dispersed country should be assured of their safety to fully commit themselves to Damascus' initiatives for an inclusive transition. We therefore reiterate our call on Damascus to implement robust vetting and rehabilitation measures to both remove and prevention extremist ideologies from taking root in its security institutions. In parallel, Damascus must establish a state monopoly over weapons and use of force, the failure of which has been an enabling cause of repeated internal and sectarian violence. Second, we welcome the progress made between Syria and OPCW on completing the Syrian chemical weapon file. This quarter featured significant developments in bilateral cooperation, including Syria's appointment of a permanent representative to OPCW and its hosting of an OPCW office in Damascus. Also noteworthy are the OPCW's tentative finding that the information gathered during the Secretariat's deployment this year may be culminated in Syria's further declaration. We also welcome the decision in October on the expedited on-site destruction of any remaining chemical weapons in Syria. We commend Syria's efforts in providing necessary support to the OPCW team within its limited resources. As the OPCW also highlighted in its November report, we call on Syria to redouble its efforts by providing suitable office space that could better ensure the integrity and confidentiality of Secretariat's vital activity. Third, the international community should not turn a blind eye to Syria's long-term humanitarian and economic challenges. As briefed by OCHA, the 2025 humanitarian response priorities for Syria have only secured 30% of the required funding, limiting essential services for refugees and creating notable gaps in winterization support. It is also deeply disturbing that more than 350 healthcare facilities have either suspended or scaled back their operating during this time of need, affecting 7.5 4 million civilians. For our part, the Republic of Korea provided $38 million in humanitarian assistance this year through international organizations focusing on restoring livelihood services and reaching affected communities to revitalize hope in the country. We also made voluntary financial contributions of around 150,000 euros to the Syria Trust Fund this year. We believe this project will alleviate suffering. In this context, we urge all states to proactively consider making contributions to Syria's early recovery as it navigates a new direction ahead. The Republic of Korea will also continue to support our shared efforts on Syrian dossier. Mr. President, the recollection of the past 2 years offers us a sense of appreciation as we had the privilege to be involved in the Security Council's discussion following the historic fall of the Assad regime. The path has been uneven and challenging, yet Damascus has continued to its effort despite a limited capacity, persistent societal divisions. As an outgoing member of the Council, we take this opportunity to express our hope that all members will continue to approach Syria with patience, realism, and the spirit of constructive engagement in advancement of peace, human rights, and prosperity of all Syrian people. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je remercie tout d'abord la secrétaire générale adjointe aux affaires politiques, Madame Di Carlo, ainsi que la sous-secrétaire générale aux affaires humanitaires, Madame Msouya, pour leurs exposés, et je remercie Madame Jalabi pour son poignant témoignage et ses propositions. Le 8 décembre, le peuple syrien commémorait l'anniversaire de la chute des Assad. La Syrie est engagée depuis 1 an dans une transition fondamentale. Les efforts portent leurs fruits, comme en témoigne le retour de 1 200 000 Syriens ces derniers mois. Mais la tâche est immense et difficile. Pour la France, le déplacement du Conseil à Damas était l'occasion de transmettre un message de soutien, ainsi que d'écouter les autorités syriennes et la société civile. Nous remercions le président al-Sharaa pour son hospitalité chaleureuse et notre collègue l'ambassadeur al-Otaibi pour avoir organisé remarquablement ce déplacement. Le Conseil de sécurité et les Nations unies doivent se mobiliser pour garantir la réussite de cette métamorphose. Ainsi, nous formulons 3 objectifs pour l'année 2026. Premier objectif, éradiquer le fléau terroriste. Pour la Syrie et les Syriens, bien sûr, mais tout autant pour que la Syrie ne puisse plus constituer une base arrière pour les groupes terroristes. La France condamne vigoureusement l'attaque terroriste à proximité de Palmyre contre des personnels militaires et civils américains qui a fait plusieurs victimes parmi les forces américaines et les accompagnateurs syriens. Nous présentons nos condoléances aux victimes et à leurs proches. En appui aux indispensables efforts des autorités syriennes, la résurgence des attaques de Daesh appelle une coopération multilatérale accrue, notamment dans le cadre de la coalition internationale contre Daesh, dans laquelle la France est engagée plus que jamais aux côtés des autorités syriennes de transition et avec 90 partenaires. Deuxièmement, appuyer la politique de réconciliation nationale, de relèvement des institutions, de reconstruction de la Syrie. Alors que les besoins des populations restent immenses, que les tensions intercommunautaires demeurent vives et que la situation socio-économique tarde à s'améliorer, ce Conseil doit continuer à mobiliser la communauté internationale. Pour répondre à l'urgence humanitaire et lancer la reconstruction, l'Union européenne a levé les sanctions sectorielles contre la Syrie en mai dernier. Les Nations unies ont un rôle majeur à jouer pour appuyer ces efforts humanitaires de développement et de reconstruction. L'établissement d'institutions nouvelles, démocratiques et inclusives, la politique de réconciliation nationale et de justice transitionnelle devront se poursuivre, afin de permettre à la Syrie de rassembler toutes les composantes de sa société, toutes confessions et toutes communautés confondues, femmes et hommes à égalité. Le Conseil a pu à Damas mesurer le travail qu'il reste à accomplir et la part que peut y prendre l'ONU dans le plein respect de la souveraineté syrienne. Nous saluons la nouvelle coordonnatrice résidente et humanitaire des Nations Unies en Syrie, Madame Nathalie Fustier, ainsi que le prochain envoyé spécial adjoint, Monsieur Claudio Cordone. Troisièmement, l'intégration pleine et entière de la Syrie dans son environnement doit être recherchée pour la paix et la stabilité dans la région. Après les décennies d'une Syrie menaçante sous le joug des Assad, une transformation majeure est possible qu'il nous revient d'appuyer. S'adressant au Conseil à Damas, le président al-Sharaa et le ministre al-Shaybani ont insisté sur leur volonté d'établir avec le Liban une relation fondée sur le respect mutuel. C'est un changement majeur qu'il nous faut appuyer. Israël doit, pour sa part, saisir l'opportunité d'une Syrie désireuse d'entrer en paix avec ses voisins, comme l'affirment ses autorités, en respectant la souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de la Syrie, en cessant ses incursions, en se retirant des territoires où elle s'est déployée depuis décembre 24 et en respectant pleinement l'accord de 1974. Monsieur le Président, ce Conseil doit se tenir toujours aux côtés des autorités et du peuple syrien, en soutien à la construction d'une Syrie libre, unie, souveraine et stable dans sa diversité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席。我首先感谢各位同胞人的通报，欢迎叙利亚、科威特、伊朗、以色列、土耳其代表出席今天的会议。安理会代表团不久前顺利访问叙利亚，我要借此机会对叙方为此做出的努力表示感谢。这是本年度安理会最后一次例行审议叙利亚问题。在这一年里，中东局势动荡不安，叙利亚形势发生重大变化。叙利亚过渡政府为推进政治过渡做出了持久努力，国际社会为帮助叙恢复稳定提供了大量支持。叙利亚社会面貌出现了积极变化。与此同时，叙利亚局势仍然复杂脆弱，族群矛盾尖锐难解，反恐形势依然严峻，人道问题挑战重重。以色列在叙以隔离区内驻军，并对叙方目标发动袭击，紧张局势令人担忧。当前形势下，安理会有必要加强团结协作，继续向叙提供建设性支持和帮助，确保叙利亚局势始终朝着正确的方向前进。在安理会代表团访叙期间，叙利亚各界向安理会表达了对国家重建的迫切愿望和对美好未来的热切期许，普遍希望叙利亚能够恢复稳定，发展经济，保持开放，重返国际社会。叙利亚过渡政府应积极回应国内民众的期待，根据安理会第2254号决议确定的原则，坚持叙人主导、叙人所有，开展包容性对话，促进内部和解，找到符合人民意愿的国家重建方案。各国应充分尊重叙利亚主权、独立、统一和领土完整，让叙利亚人民自主决定自己的未来。主席，安全是国家重建的重要前提，涉叙反恐问题是国际社会的共同关切。大批外国恐怖作战分子在叙活动作案，严重威胁叙利亚自身乃至整个地区的和平与安全。最近，叙利亚霍姆斯和伊德利卜陆续发生恐袭事件，再次给我们敲响了警钟。 我们呼吁叙利亚过渡政府履行反恐义务，采取一切有效措施，坚决打击包括东伊运在内的所有被安理会列明的国际恐怖组织。各国应当坚持反恐零容忍、不动摇，合力应对恐怖主义威胁，共同反对选择性反恐和双重标准。安理会涉恐制裁列明是重要的反恐工具，安理会相关委员会应认真研究有关除名申请，避免在条件不成熟的情况下仓促作出决定。中方愿继续同国际社会一道，为帮助叙利亚早日实现安全、稳定和发展发挥建设性作用。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank USG DiCarlo, ASG Musia, and Ms. Jalabi for briefing us today. And I welcome the participation of the representative of Syria in our meeting. This month, we marked a year since the end of the Assad regime's brutal rule and the start of a brighter chapter for Syria. During the Security Council's historic visit to Damascus to mark this anniversary, we met with the Syrian government, civil society actors, and religious leaders. Across these engagements, we heard a strong message of collective determination to build a more secure, stable, prosperous, and inclusive country. I thank the representatives of Slovenia, Denmark, and Algeria for leading this visit, and the Syrian government and the UN country team for such a strong welcome. We also heard of the challenges that remain in Syria. As Ms. Musia said, humanitarian needs remain immense. Drought-like conditions on water supply and agricultural production are likely to lead to a further deterioration in food security levels. To address these challenges, it will be crucial to ensure humanitarian operations in line with the principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence are possible. The appalling attack in Palmyra last week was a reminder of the enduring threat of terrorism in Syria. We express our condolences to the families of 3 US personnel killed. We welcome the decision of the Syrian government to join the global coalition against Daesh, a clear commitment to tackle security threats and support international efforts against terrorism. Instances of sectarian violence this year have deepened divisions and threatened the peaceful political transition. We call for a greater focus on social cohesion and the protection of human rights to prevent violent events like this happening again. As we heard powerfully from Ms. Jalabi, a successful transition needs to include representation from across Syria's diverse ethnic and religious communities, as well as the full, meaningful, and safe participation of women. We welcome continued dialogue between Israel and Syria, but we remain deeply concerned by Israel's ongoing attacks in Syria, which risk further destabilizing the country. The impact of these attacks on civilians is unacceptable. We again call on Israel to respect Syria's territorial integrity and uphold its obligations to peace, stability, and security under international law. President, in Damascus, we made clear that the UN also has a vital role to play in supporting Syria. We welcome the growing relationship between the UN and the Syrian government and support the UN's plans to move the Special Envoy's office to Damascus. Finally, the easing of sanctions and increased investment from international partners have provided an important boost to Syria's recovery. The second year of Syria's transition will be pivotal. We should continue to offer our collective support to drive progress towards an inclusive transition with Syrians able to live in peace, prosperity, and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Slovenia. I thank Under-Secretary General De Carlo and Assistant Secretary General Msuya for their briefings today. I also welcome Ambassador of Syria in the chamber. I especially extend our gratitude to Mariam Jalabi for her intervention. Mariam, your messages for the international community are heard loud and clear in this chamber. We should be in no doubt that the energy, commitment, and sacrifice shown over decades by Syrian civil society, and Syrian women in particular, have kept the struggle for freedom and democracy in Syria alive. Civil society can and should continue to play an integral role in shaping Syria's future as part of a meaningful and inclusive national dialogue and at every table. Colleagues, as others before me have acknowledged, we convene today having recently marked 1 year since the fall of the brutal Assad regime, a turning point in the trajectory of Syria's long and rich history. We also meet 2 weeks since the Security Council historic visit to Syria, which Slovenia was proud to co-lead as president. Today offers an opportunity to reflect on the monumental events of the past year, as well as the Council's first-hand experience on the ground, while also looking to the great opportunities and responsibilities that lie ahead. Our visit was undertaken in a spirit of support and solidarity with the people of Syria. This remains our guiding light. As I said earlier, the process ahead has to be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned. What struck me during the visit was the extent of destruction in parts of Damascus, matched in equal measure by the determination of the Syrian people to rebuild. The international community should do all it can to support this, and has already taken important steps. This includes the lifting of EU economic sanctions in May and the adoption of Resolution 2799 last month, and we welcome the decision of the US legislators to repeal the Caesar Act. And yet, there remains much left to do to facilitate reconstruction and, critically, to transition from humanitarian assistance to sustainable long-term development and economic recovery. Slovenia sees the UN playing a critical support role here, and therefore hopes that we can soon move forward with an agreement on the UN's reconfigured presence in Damascus. Colleagues, what we have learned from the experience in conflict in our own region is that peace is more than just the absence of armed conflict. In the aftermath of seismic change, divisions still persist, and trust requires time to rebuild. This is evidenced by the devastating violence and continued volatility in Showdown and the coastal region of Syria this year. There must be accountability for all acts of violence, recent and historic, regardless of perpetrator. We welcome efforts undertaken by the Syrian authorities to establish national bodies to address recent violence, as well as issues relating to transitional justice and the missing, which is reinforced by the efforts of groundbreaking UN General Assembly mechanisms. The wounds of the past will be difficult to heal, but this work, when conducted transparently and efficiently, is essential to the process of healing. Equally vital is the process of building a national security force under one umbrella, encompassing disarmament, demobilization, and integration of all armed groups, as well as countering and preventing terrorism and violent extremism. We condemned the killing of 2 US soldiers and a translator in Palmyra days ago, and deeply regret all victims of terrorism in Syria. The recent announcement that Syria will join the global coalition against Daesh is welcome, as is the renewed cooperation with the OPCW and IAEA. Slovenia furthermore calls for progress towards the implementation of the 10 March agreement between the SDF and the transitional authorities. Colleagues, Syria should be a center for stability in the region. This requires the constructive engagement of Syria's neighbors. We believe that the Security Council visit demonstrated our shared commitment to the country's sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity. These principles should be respected by all, at all times. In particular, Israel's violations of the disengagement of forces agreement are unjustifiable. There is no legal base for involving Article 51 to justify preemptive strikes in foreign territories. Slovenia calls for the full implementation of the 1974 agreement and looks forward to the renewal of the forces mandate this month. At this critical opportunity for the region, we urge all actors to show restraint and choose the path of diplomacy. Colleagues, during our 2 years in this seat, it was arguably the change in Syria that most inspired a promise of hope for a better future. As Slovenia exits the Security Council, we remain fully invested in this promise. The journey ahead will, no doubt, be a long one. Its success will depend on building trust. Trust among Syrians, trust between the Syrian people and the Syrian authorities, trust between Syria and its neighbors, and trust between Syria and the international community, which we believe can be forged and reaffirmed in this chamber and in these very halls. There are no quick fixes, and we do not underestimate the scale of the challenge, but we believe that there is a common determination, including around this table, and with common determination, much can be achieved. The Syrian people can count on Slovenia to continue to play its part. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Syria.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. اسمحوا لي من منبركم هذا منبر العالم، وقبل أن أبدأ ببياني أن أتوجه إلى السوريين والسوريات داخل وخارج سوريا بأحر التهاني بمناسبة عيد التحرير. كل عام وأنتم وسوريا بألف خير. بداية أتقدم بالشكر للسيدة روزميري ديكارلو على إحاطتها وعلى قدومها اليوم رغم مرضها، وأتمنى لها الشفاء العاجل. للسيدة جويس مسويا على إحاطتها كذلك، وللسيدة مريم جلبي مقدمة الإحاطة كممثلة عن المجتمع المدني السوري الذي نعتز ونفخر بأن صوته وصوت المرأة السورية بات مسموعا في سوريا الجديدة من سوريا الجديدة، سوريا التي تعول على السوريات اللواتي ضحينا وعملنا بكل شجاعة ليكن شريكات حقيقيات في المستقبل الذي نصبو إليه جميعا. وأتقدم بالشكر للسيدة نجاة رشدي نائبة المبعوث الخاص إلى سوريا على الجهود التي بذلتها طوال فترة ولايتها. ويسعدني أن أشكركم أيضا جميعا، فقد أظهرتم ببياناتكم اليوم توحد المجلس مجددا في دعمه لنا على طريق بناء البلاد والمضي نحو المستقبل. السيد الرئيس، منذ عام وإلى اليوم لا تزال المعجزة السورية مستمرة، واليوم وللتاريخ أستعرض معكم بعضاً مما أنجزه السوريون والسوريات حتى وصلنا إلى ما رأيتموه بأعينكم قبل أيام في دمشق. فمع لحظة تحرير دمشق أعلنا طي صفحة الاستبداد، وحافظنا على مؤسسات الدولة، وعزمنا على بناء دولة القانون وتحقيق التنمية والازدهار. فعلى المستوى السياسي الوطني تجنبنا الفوضى وبدأنا بعملية سياسية بقيادة سورية لمرحلة انتقالية بصورة مسؤولة ومنظمة. استهلت هذه المرحلة بحوار وطني، فصياغة الإعلان الدستوري، ومن ثم تشكيل حكومة تشاركية للمرحلة الانتقالية قائمة على الكفاءات السورية داخل وخارج البلاد، وتعكس التنوع السوري بعيداً عن المحاصصة السياسية أو الطائفية. ولملء الفراغ التشريعي وللمرة الأولى بعد عقود من الاستبداد أتيحت للسوريين فرصة المشاركة السياسية، فتم إجراء انتخابات مجلس الشعب التي صممت بشكل يراعي خصوصية الحالة السورية وما خلفته سنوات نزاع كبيرة ومعقدة. وفيما يتعلق بالسلطة القضائية، حرصنا على البدء بإصلاح المنظومة القضائية لتحقيق استقلاليتها وضمان عدالتها ونزاهتها. وعلى المسار الأمني، تمت إعادة هيكلة وزارة الداخلية بشكل عصري، وانطلق العمل لتأسيس جيش احترافي من خلال إنهاء حالة الفصائلية وحصر السلاح بيد الدولة وإلغاء الخدمة الإلزامية. لقد بات لدينا مؤسسات أمنية وعسكرية محكومة بمدونات سلوك تؤكد على حماية المواطنين ومعاملتهم بكرامة واحترام. في سوريا الجديدة أيضاً يقوم رجال الأمن بحماية المتظاهرين بدلاً من قمعهم كما يظهر في هذه الصورة. يقفون بثبات يؤدون واجبهم الوطني بحماية السوريين بغض النظر عن انتماءاتهم السياسية أو الدينية أو العرقية، في مشهد هذا المشهد كان يعد ضرباً من الخيال قبل عام ونيف. في سوريا الجديدة أيضاً تعمل جميع وزارات الدولة ومؤسساتها كخلية نحل للارتقاء بالوضع المعيشي والخدمي لجميع السوريين، مسلمين ومسيحيين واليهود الذين بدأوا بالعودة إلى وطنهم بعد عقود من الإبعاد القسري. الزميلات والزملاء، ولتحقيق الاستقرار المستدام تم إنشاء الهيئة الوطنية للعدالة الانتقالية ضماناً لحقوق الضحايا وتحقيقاً للمصالحة الوطنية الشاملة. وانطلاقاً من مسؤوليتنا تجاه أمهات وذوي المفقودين، أنشأنا الهيئة الوطنية للمفقودين لكشف مصير أكثر من 100,000 من المفقودين والمغيبين قسراً. السيد الرئيس، في سوريا الجديدة تطلع الحكومة بواجباتها الأخلاقية والقانونية بشجاعة، وتتعامل مع الأحداث التي خرجت عن السيطرة بشفافية ومسؤولية. فقد عملت الحكومة السورية على احتواء التوترات ومعالجة الجراح المجتمعية إثر الأحداث المؤسفة التي عصفت بالساحل، وشكلت لجنة مستقلة للتحقيق، وباشرت السلطات القضائية بالمحاكمات العلنية والمفتوحة للمتهمين بارتكاب الانتهاكات. كان آخر جزء من هذه المحاكمات صباح اليوم في حلب. فسوريا الجديدة لا تقوم على الإفلات من العقاب، بل على سيادة القانون والمساءلة. وفيما يتعلق بالأحداث المؤلمة التي وقعت في السويداء الحبيبة وفاقمها التدخل الإسرائيلي الخبيث، وصلنا إلى مرحلة متقدمة في تنفيذ خارطة الطريق التي وضعناها بالتعاون مع المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بهدف إعادة الاستقرار وتعزيز الثقة وضمان المحاسبة وإعادة إعمار القرى والممتلكات المتضررة. وجدير بالذكر هنا أن في الساحل وفي السويداء تعاونت الحكومة السورية مع آليات الأمم المتحدة، فبعد أن وافقنا على تمديد ولاية لجنة تحقيق الدولية المستقلة في سابقة من تاريخ سوريا المعاصر، تم السماح لها بالوصول غير المقيد على حد تعبيرها إلى المناطق المتأثرة والتعامل الإيجابي مع تقريرها وتوصياتها في سابقة تعكس التزام سوريا بالشفافية والتعاون البناء مع المجتمع الدولي على أساس الاحترام الكامل لسيادتها. السيد الرئيس، شهدت سوريا تطوراً ملموساً خلال العام الفائت تمثل بعودة أكثر من 3 ملايين لاجئ ومهجر إلى ديارهم، في مؤشر واضح على تحسن الأوضاع الأمنية واستعادة الثقة بالدولة. وخارجياً، استعادت سوريا حضورها الفاعل على الساحة الدولية من خلال زيارات ولقاءات رفيعة المستوى شرقاً وغرباً، والمشاركة الرئاسية في أعمال الأسبوع رفيع المستوى للجمعية العامة. ونجحت الدبلوماسية السورية وجهود السوريين والسوريات في طي صفحة العقوبات الأمريكية والأوروبية بشكل نهائي وإلى غير رجعة. وفي إطار التزامها بالأمن الإقليمي والدولي، وضعت سوريا حداً لآفة المخدرات التي غزا بها النظام البائد المنطقة، وعملت على تفكيك شبكات التهريب بالتعاون مع دول الجوار. انضمت سوريا إلى التحالف الدولي ضد داعش، وأوفت بالتزاماتها وما تزال في مجال مكافحة الإرهاب، مؤكدة أنها لن تكون مصدر تهديد لأي دولة. وعلى الرغم من الجهود المبذولة، لا تزال التهديدات الإرهابية قائمة، وقد تجلت هذه التحديات مؤخراً في هجمات داعش الإرهابية على عناصر وزارتي الدفاع والداخلية، وكذلك في هجومه الإرهابي الجبان الذي استهدف دورية مشتركة لقوات الأمن السورية وللقوات الأمريكية قرب مدينة تدمر قبل عدة أيام. إننا نعرب عن خالص المواساة لعائلات الجنود السوريين والأمريكيين الذين سقطوا وللشعب الأمريكي الصديق، ونجدد التأكيد على بالتنسيق مع الشركاء الدوليين حفاظاً على أمن البلاد والمنطقة والعالم. السيد الرئيس، في الوقت الذي تسعى فيه الحكومة السورية والمجتمع الدولي لتحقيق الاستقرار في الشرق الأوسط، تسعى إسرائيل جاهدة لزعزعة هذا الاستقرار. في الوقت الذي تلتزم فيه سوريا باتفاق فض الاشتباك لعام 74، لا تتوقف إسرائيل عن انتهاكه. في الوقت الذي تحترم فيه سوريا القانون الدولي وقرارات مجلس الأمن، تضرب إسرائيل بهذا القانون وبهذه القرارات من مجلسكم الموقر عرض الحائط. في الوقت الذي يجهد فيه الجميع لإرساء السلام في الشرق الأوسط، تدفع إسرائيل المنطقة إلى الحروب والنزاعات. في الوقت الذي ندعم فيه الأمم المتحدة وأصحاب الخوذ الزرقاء، تضيق عليهم إسرائيل وتمنعهم من الاطلاع بولايتهم. في الوقت الذي نحاول فيه الوصول إلى اتفاق أمني بوساطة أمريكية مشكورة ومقدرة، تمعن إسرائيل في المماطلة. في الوقت الذي نسعى فيه لحفظ الأرواح، كل الأرواح، ترتكب إسرائيل المجازر بحق المدنيين السوريين، وكان آخرها مجزرة بيت جن التي أدت إلى ارتقاء أكثر من 13 شهيداً مدنياً، بينهم نساء وأطفال. ولكن سيد الرئيس، ولكن في الوقت الذي تحاول فيه إسرائيل إشعال الفتنة وبث الفرقة، اجتمع السوريون بمكوناتهم المتنوعة بمن فيهم الدروز التي تزعم إسرائيل زوراً حمايتهم لتقديم واجب العزاء بشهداء مجزرة بيت جن التي ارتكبها قوات الدفاع الإسرائيلي. فدمنا كسوريين واحد ومصيرنا واحد. الزملاء والزميلات، ما الرسالة التي يتم إيصالها للسوريين وللعالم حين يكافأ من يحترم القانون الدولي وينتهج الدبلوماسية بالقصف والتوغل وتكرار الاعتداءات والانتهاكات؟ كيف تريدون منا الإجابة على تساؤلات الشارع السوري الغاضب فيما نفعت الدبلوماسية وضبط النفس؟ السيد الرئيس، قبل أن أنهي بياني أتوجه بخالص الشكر والتقدير إلى وفود الجزائر وسلوفينيا وغيانا وسيراليون وجمهورية كوريا على الجهود القيمة والمسؤولة التي بذلوها خلال فترة عضويتهم في مجلس الأمن، وعلى ما أبدوه من دعم صادق لسوريا وللشعب السوري. ختاماً السيد الرئيس، ونحن على أعتاب عام جديد ملؤه التفاؤل، رسالة للسوريين ورسالة للعالم. نقول للسوريين جميعاً: حققنا المستحيل وصنعنا المعجزة، فلنكمل الحكاية. وأقول للعالم: كونوا معنا في كتابتها. شكراً السيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for the statement and for the nice words addressed to the outgoing members of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. يشرفني أن ألقي هذا البيان باسم خالص التهاني والتقدير بمناسبة توليها رئاسة مجلس الأمن خلال الشهر الجاري، مشيدين بجهودها في أداء أعمال المجلس. كما نتوجه بالشكر إلى المشاركين ومقدمي الإحاطة، كل من السيدة روزميري ديكارلو وكيلة السيد الأمين العام للشؤون السياسية وبناء السلام، والسيدة جويس مسويا الأمينة العامة المساعدة للشؤون الإنسانية ونائبة منسق الإغاثة في حالات الطوارئ، والسيدة مريم جلبي ممثلة الحركة السياسية النسوية السورية. السيد الرئيس، تجدد المجموعة العربية التأكيد على أهمية الاحترام الكامل لسيادة سوريا واستقلالها ووحدة وسلامة أراضيها، كما تجدد رفضها القاطع للتدخلات الأجنبية في شؤون سوريا الداخلية. ومن هذا المنطلق تدين المجموعة العربية بأشد العبارات الهجمات والانتهاكات الإسرائيلية المتكررة غير المبررة على الأرض السورية، بما في ذلك التوغل الإسرائيلي الأخير في بيت جن في ريف دمشق بعد منطقة الفصل، والذي أدى إلى مجزرة مروعة استهدفت مدنيين أبرياء، ما أدى لارتقاء أكثر من 13 شهيدا مدنيا بينهم نساء وأطفال، وإصابة عشرات المدنيين الآخرين. وتدين كذلك الجولة الاستعراضية الاستفزازية لرئيس وزراء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وعدد من الوزراء والمسؤولين في حكومة الاحتلال داخل الأرض السورية المحتلة، وتطالب بوجوب إلزام إسرائيل بالانسحاب الفوري والكامل وغير المشروط من المناطق التي دخلتها بعد 8 ديسمبر عام 2024 ومن كامل الجولان العربي السوري المحتل، وذلك تنفيذا لقرارات مجلس الأمن رقم 242 و338 و497. ونشير هنا إلى ما ورد في تقرير السيد الأمين العام بشأن قوة الأمم المتحدة لمراقبة فض الاشتباك الأندوف الصادر قبل أسبوعين، واقتبس: حتى 3 نوفمبر عام 2025 حافظت قوات الدفاع الإسرائيلية على 10 مواقع أنشأتها على الجانب برافو، وعززتها ب8 مواقع في منطقة الفصل، بما في ذلك مستشفى مؤقت وموقعان في منطقة الحد على الجانب الخط برافو نهاية الاقتباس. وعليه تطالب المجموعة إسرائيل بتنفيذ اتفاق فض الاشتباك لعام 1974 واحترامه، كون أن أحكام الاتفاق تعالج بشكل واف جميع الاعتبارات الأمنية في هذا السياق، وتوفر مسارا متسقا لضمان الاستقرار بما يحتم الحفاظ عليه وتطبيقه دون إخلال. واستنادا إلى ما سبق، تشدد المجموعة العربية أن سيادة سوريا وأمنها واستقرارها ركائز أساسية من ركائز استقرار وأمن المنطقة، ونرفض أي مساس أيا كان ومن أي جهة كانت بهذه المبادئ التي يمثل احترامها شرطا أساسيا لتحقيق الأمن والاستقرار في المنطقة والعالم أجمع. السيد الرئيس، نجتمع اليوم بعد مرور عام كامل على سقوط نظام الأسد، عام كامل لم يكن مجرد محطة سياسية مفصلية فحسب، بل كان عاما رسخ في وجدان الشعب السوري الذي استعاد صوته وكرامته بعد سنوات طويلة من الآلام والمعاناة. إذ تحيي المجموعة العربية الشعب السوري الشجاع بمناسبة الذكرى الأولى للتحرير، ونستذكر قبل كل شيء صبر السوريين والسوريات وتضحياتهم وأمالهم التي لم تنطفئ، والتي برهنت أن إرادة الشعوب لا تهزم، وأن التغيير حين يبنى على التطلعات المشروعة للشعوب يفضي حقا إلى المكاسب الإيجابية التي تصون كرامة الإنسان. فهنيئا لسوريا ولشعبها. السيد الرئيس، تشيد المجموعة العربية بما حققته الحكومة السورية الجديدة خلال هذا العام من خطوات وطنية مهمة، بدءا من إطلاق مؤتمر الحوار الوطني الشامل وإصدار الإعلان الدستوري، مرورا بتأسيس هيئتين وطنيتين للمفقودين وللعدالة الانتقالية، وإجراء انتخابات مجلس الشعب، وتنفيذ خارطة الطريق السورية الأردنية الأمريكية لحل أزمة السويداء، علاوة على الخطوات الجريئة التي أسهمت في مكافحة شبكات المخدرات، ووصولا إلى الانضمام للتحالف الدولي ضد داعش وتجديد الالتزام الحازم بمكافحة الإرهاب. كما نثمن الانخراط البناء للحكومة السورية مع المجتمع الدولي، بما في ذلك استقبالها مجلس الأمن مطلع الشهر الجاري واستعادة مكانتها في المنطقة والعالم. وتجدد المجموعة الترحيب باعتماد مجلس الأمن للقرار 2799 القاضي بشط اسم فخامة الرئيس أحمد الشر والسيد أنس خطاب وزير الداخلية من قائمة الجزاءات، في تجسيد واضح للإرادة الدولية الداعمة لسوريا. وترحب المجموعة العربية بما تحقق من تقدم في تهيئة الظروف الملائمة للعودة الطوعية والآمنة والكريمة للاجئين. وفي هذا السياق تثمن المجموعة العربية الدور الكبير الذي اطلعت به الدول المستضيفة في استضافة اللاجئين السوريين، وتدعو المجتمع الدولي لزيادة وتوسيع الدعم الموجه للدول المستضيفة، والتي لا يمكن أن تتحمل هذا العبء بمفردها نيابة عن المجتمع الدولي، وذلك إلى حين عودتهم إلى بلدهم. السيد الرئيس، تدين المجموعة العربية الهجوم الإرهابي الجبان الذي استهدف دورية مشتركة للقوات السورية والأمريكية قرب مدينة تدمر وسط سوريا، وتعرب المجموعة عن الدعم الكامل لجهود سوريا في مجال مكافحة الإرهاب وتأمين الحدود ومكافحة تهريب الأسلحة والمخدرات، وتؤكد على أهمية دعم هذه الجهود وتعزيز التعاون في إطار دعم الأمن الإقليمي ومكافحة التهديدات العابرة للحدود. وتثمن المجموعة العربية مواصلة الحكومة السورية التعاون مع المجتمع الدولي بهدف التصدي للمخاطر الإرهابية والقضاء على الإرهاب بكافة أشكاله وصوره واجتثاث منابعه. وتؤكد المجموعة العربية مجددا على أن أمن سوريا واستقرارها جزء لا يتجزأ من الأمن العربي والإقليمي، وأن الحفاظ على وحدة سوريا ومؤسساتها الوطنية هو الضمان الحقيقي لمنع زعزعة الاستقرار الإقليمي ولمكافحة الإرهاب بجميع أشكاله ومظاهره ومنع عودة الجماعات الإرهابية. السيد الرئيس، ترحب المجموعة العربية بإنهاء حقبة العقوبات التي لا طالما أثقلت كاهل الشعب السوري، بما في ذلك رفع كندا للعقوبات المفروضة على سوريا وإلغاء قانون قيصر بشكل نهائي من قبل الكونغرس الأمريكي قبل أيام، باعتبار ذلك خطوة بناءة ومحورية تفتح أمام الشعب السوري آفاق مرحلة جديدة من التعافي والاستقرار. كما نعرب عن تقديرنا لجميع الدول التي ساندت الشعب السوري خلال أحلق فتراته، بما في ذلك تقديم المملكة العربية السعودية ودولة قطر الدعم لموظفي القطاع العام في سوريا. وفي هذا السياق ندعو المجتمع الدولي ومؤسسات التمويل وقطاع الأعمال إلى اغتنام هذه اللحظات البناءة لتعزيز الاستثمارات في سوريا، فالاقتصاد السوري يشكل اليوم أرضا خصبة لفرص واعدة تسهم في دعم مسار الأعمار وتمكين المجتمعات المحلية وترسيخ أسس السلام المستدام. وفي الختام السيد الرئيس، تؤكد المجموعة العربية على التزامها الثابت بالوقوف إلى جانب سوريا وشعبها الشقيق في مسيرتهم النبيلة لبناء دولة آمنة مستقرة مزدهرة تسودها العدالة والكرامة والمساواة وسيادة القانون، دولة تصون حقوق جميع السوريين بغض النظر عن العرق أو الدين أو الجنس أو الانتماء السياسي، وتشدد على أن نجاح هذه المسيرة يتطلب تضافر الجهود الدولية ودعم مجلسكم الموقر وصولا إلى مستقبل يلبي تطلعات جميع السوريين دون ما تمييز. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, thank you, Mr. President. We thank Under Secretary General Ms. DiCarlo, Assistant Secretary General, and Ms. Misuya for their informative briefing. We listen to the views shared by Ms. Jalabi. Mr. President, we note the recent visiting mission of the Security Council to Syria and Lebanon, initiated by Algeria, Denmark, and Slovenia, as well as the report presented today. We hope this visit will lead to concrete and effective outcomes by the Council, especially to compel the Israeli regime to end its occupation and cease the unlawful actions immediately. Regarding the situation in Syria, I wish to make the following points. First, 1 year has passed since the establishment of the Syrian interim government. Over the past year, important transitional steps have been undertaken by Damascus. At the same time, the Syrian people continue to face acute social, humanitarian, economic, and security hardship. The continued operation of armed groups outside the control of the Syrian authorities, marked by arbitrary violence against civilians and violations of humanitarian rights, remains deeply alarming and poses a serious threat to peace, stability, and national cohesion. The tragic incident witnessed over the past years in the coastal region and in Ceuta underscored the urgent need to restore full state authority, uphold the rule of law, and prevent exploitation of sectarian and communal division for violent ends. In this regard, we note the decision by the interim Syrian government to establish national mechanism to investigate the incident in coastal areas and the crimes committed in Ceuta and to hold perpetrators accountable. Second, the resurgence of terrorism remains a grave and immediate threat to Syria and wider region. The reemergence and growing operational capacity of ISIS, including recent terrorist attacks, serve as a stark reminder of the persistent nature of this threat. Iran unequivocally condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and retraced that counterterrorism efforts must be comprehensive, non-selective, and fully consistent with international law, respect for the sovereignty and territorial of the Syrian Arab Republic. Third, we take note of additional development on the ground, including the return of more than 1 million refugees and nearly 2 million internally displaced persons to their homes, as well as the easing of certain sanctions and improved humanitarian access. While these developments are encouraging, the situation remains fragile. Over the past year, the Israeli regime has intensified its unlawful use of force, expanded its military footprint, and pursued policies aimed at consolidating and normalizing its occupation of Syrian land. We strongly condemn Israel's unlawful incursion into the town of Beit Jinn on 28 November, during which Israeli terrorist force killed 13 civilians, including women and children, injured dozens, and forcibly displaced residents through deliberate and indiscriminate shelling of civilian homes. As mentioned in the letter dated 28 November from Permanent Representative of the Syrian Arab Republic addressed to the Secretary General and the President of Security Council, this criminal assault constitutes a grave war crime under international law. The assault and the resistance of local residents to Israeli aggression with the support of the Syrian interim government underscore the inevitable and destabilizing consequences of prolonged occupation and repeated acts of aggression. Israeli actions are neither defensive nor incidental. They are part of a deliberate strategy to entrench occupation, fragment Syria, and weaken its national cohesion by exploiting ethnic and sectarian differences and promoting separatist agendas. Such conducts constitute a direct threat to regional peace and security. The Security Council cannot remain passive in the face of this violation. The affirmation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria is legally hollow and empty words if not accompanied by concrete measures to compel compliance by the Israeli occupying regime. Continued inaction, selective silence, or the political shielding of Israel by a permanent member of this council serve only to normalize and legitimize its occupation and act of aggression and renders to council resolutions ineffective and unenforceable. Fourth, from the outset of Syria's political transition, the Islamic Republic of Iran has acted responsibly and consistently supported Syria's sovereignty, unity, territorial integrity, and freely expressed will of its people. As a contiguous neighbor, Iran considers Syrian stability and territorial integrity essential to regional peace and security. We firmly believe that addressing Syria's challenges requires, first and foremost, an immediate end to Israeli aggression and occupation, effective and principled counterterrorism efforts, and continued effort by the Syrian authorities to protect minority rights and advance a genuinely inclusive political process enabling the meaningful participation of all components of Syrian society. Iran will continue to support a sovereign, stable, and secure Syria and its reintegration into the international community. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank USG DiCarlo, ASG Musia, and Mrs. Jalabi for their comprehensive briefings. Mr. President, it has now been more than a year since Syria embarked upon a historic and long-awaited process of transformation. 8 December 2024 stand out as a defining moment in this journey. During the anniversary, across cities and towns, Syrians filled the streets in scenes of peaceful celebration, reflecting a collective sense of hope, unity, and renewed confidence in the future. These moments resonated far beyond Syria's borders, symbolizing the enduring resilience of the Syrian people and their determination to reclaim peace, dignity, and national cohesion after years of profound suffering. Despite persistent and multi-layered challenges, the Syrian government has made notable and commendable progress during this period. Efforts to build inclusive governance structures that genuinely reflect Syria's rich social, cultural, and religious diversity merit sustained encouragement and international support. In this regard, it remains essential to foster unity among all segments of Syrian society around the principle of equal citizenship as guaranteed by the Constitution. The recent meeting between President al-Sharaa and representatives of the Alawite community from the coastal region is a welcome and meaningful step toward reconciliation, confidence building, and the strengthening of national cohesion. At the international level, the visit of the Security Council mission to Damascus on 4th of December constituted a powerful and tangible demonstration of international solidarity with Syria at a critical juncture. We are further encouraged by the Syrian government's growing engagement with the United Nations and broader international community. We trust that, once appointed, the future Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria will play a pivotal role in sustaining this positive momentum and in accompanying Syria along its path towards lasting stability. Mr. President, notwithstanding these hopeful and encouraging developments, the overall risk environment remains high. The recent attack targeting Syrian and American forces during the joint patrol near Tadmut once again demonstrated that Daesh continues to exploit every opportunity to regroup and carry out attacks. We condemn the attack and extend our heartfelt condolences to the families of those who lost their lives, as well as to Syria and the United States partners, our partners within the global coalition against Daesh. This tragic incident underscores the urgent necessity of accelerating international support for Syria in building professional, united, armed and security forces and in further strengthening its counterterrorism capacities. Mr. President, over the past year, the Syrian government has pursued a measured, responsible and peaceful foreign policy, taking sustained steps to restore Syria's rightful and respected place within the international community. It has made significant efforts to establish constructive and good neighborly relations with all neighboring and regional countries, while consistently reaffirming that Syria poses no threat to its neighbors or to any other state. However, throughout 2025, Israel's continued attacks and repeated violations have undermined the collective efforts of the Syrian government and the international community aimed at consolidating security and stability in the country. Stability in southern Syria must be ensured in full accordance with 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement. In this regard, we reiterate our call for Israel's withdrawal from the buffer zone and from the areas it has occupied since last December. Respect for Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity remains indispensable. We hope that in 2026, Israel will heed repeated international calls and engage constructively with Syria to create the conditions necessary for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. Another serious destabilizing factor remains the presence of the PKK extensions in Syria. As we approach the end of the year, it is imperative that the tentative March agreement yield concrete and tangible results. Full restoration of Syrian government's authority across the entire national territory is essential. Furthermore, the role of the Syrian government in the process of UNHCR assuming responsibility for the administration of camps and detention facilities in the northeast should be further strengthened in line with Syria's sovereignty and with international humanitarian standards. Mr. President, Turkey will continue to act as a constructive partner for all those committed to supporting stability and security, reconciliation, and sustainable economic recovery in Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Mr. President, Under-Secretary DiCarlo, distinguished colleagues, let me be clear today. Israel will defend its people on every border, including our northern border. We will not allow terrorists, armed groups, or foreign proxies operate next to us. Israel will act to defend its Druze allies and to prevent ground, aerial, or cross-border attacks launched from neighboring areas. After October 7th, there can be no confusion and no room for error. Israel will not allow Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, or any other terrorist group to build, rebuild, or dig in along our borders. What was once tolerated before October 7th will not be tolerated again. Syria is responsible for what happens on its soil. What we are asking for is simple: the immediate creation of a demilitarized zone stretching from Damascus to the existing buffer area, including across Mount Hermon and its summit. This is the minimum needed to prevent escalation. Israel prefers stability. Israel prefers peace, but our security is not negotiable. Agreements are possible only if Israel's basic security needs are fully respected. If they are not, Israel will act to defend itself. Ambassador Jalabi called the Beit Jinn incident a massacre. Allow me to share with you the facts. On the 27th of November, our forces carried out a targeted operation in the southern Syrian village of Beit Jinn. The goal was clear: to stop terrorists from Jama'ah Islamiyah, the Lebanese branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were operating from Syria and planning attacks against Israeli civilians. The operation was a success. All suspects were arrested. Several terrorists were eliminated. This operation did not happen in isolation. There is growing proof that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are once again trying to build up in Syria, openly and without fear or consequence. Beit Jinn has long been a center for Hamas-linked terrorist activity. Earlier this year, on the 3rd of June, 2 rockets were fired from Syria into the Golan Heights, to the Israeli side. Responsibility was claimed by a group calling themselves the Martyr Muhammad Death Brigades. These attacks were not random. Hamas and the Lebanese branch of the Muslim Brotherhood work closely together. After October 7th, they operated under a unified command structure in attacks against northern Israel. Ambassador Jalabi, Israel will not allow Syria to become a safe place for terrorists. We have seen the cost of allowing Hezbollah to entrench itself in Lebanon. Israel will not repeat that mistake. The responsibility lies with the Syrian authorities to stop this activity. If they do not, Israel will. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. The representative of the Syrian Arab Republic has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The issue with the statement of Ambassador Danon is that the facts that he's mentioning appear to be only coming from one source. Not the UN, not the reports, not any member state around this room, not any intelligence agency that we work with on anti-ISIS. Facts that they've decided to use as excuses to be able to kill and detain Syrian civilians. We, and I announce this here, have given access to the UN Commission of Inquiry and the UN Office